Well, welcome back once again, all my devoted vintage dirt bike loving YouTubers, and thanks once again for giving up your very valuable time to check out more off-road two-wheeled icons here on my Classic Dirt Bike TV internet channel. Now in this featured clip we are going to continue to browse more of those fantastic classics from the Terry Pickering private motocross collection. So stay with me for the next few minutes as we check out this immaculate 1980 250 Ancillotti. Now, as in the previous videos, this extremely rare Ancillotti 250 bike from 1980 is yet again not a restoration but another brand new bike from that year. Now, this machine was unsold and has never even had a drop of fuel put into its fuel tank. Now, the machine is another Italian built bike with an Italian frame, Italian motor, and as you would expect, Italian front and rear suspension. Now, the bike is one of 5 brand new machines purchased recently by Terry to add to his own quite diverse collection of classic old dirt bikes. Now, the word is that these bikes were actually manufactured in 1979 but were released for sale in early 1980, although I'm sure I could be corrected on that particular point by my superior and more knowledgeable YouTube viewers. Now, Ancillotti motorcycles were formed by Ernesto Ancillotti, who opened an engine and suspension repair shop in Florence, Italy shortly after the end of World War II, although the company did start by building bicycles. Now, Ancillotti then went on to build two-stroke motocross and enduro bikes, and even made parts for racing go-karts. Now, Ancillotti ended motorcycle production in 1984, although the family did keep on designing and patenting various components for motorcycles until 1992, although future generations of the Ancillotti family are now building some of the world's finest mountain bikes and other types of racing bicycles. Now, as you can see, this Ancillotti is not powered by its own motor but is actually powered by an Italian-made Hyro engine. Now, Hyro were a highly respected engine supplier in Italy, and their Hyro motors were fitted in many different makes and models of motorcycles, and not just these motocross machines. Now, the engine is a two-stroke single-cylinder piston port 250 with a 6-speed gearbox. Now, the engine also has the standard wet multi-plate clutch, and the sparks are provided by electronic ignition. Now, the fuel is delivered by this Japanese Mikuni carb, which is fitted with this very handy push-down choke lever to aid cold starting. Now, on the primary drive side of this engine, it always appears to me that this bike has a casing missing on this left hand side, but apparently this was how they came straight from the factory in 1980. Now, from what I can recall about these bikes, this Italian 250 Hyro motor put out about 36 horsepower, which was very reasonable for such a small motor of this stature. No reed valve, of course, fitted on this engine, as it would be another year or two before Hyro made the jump to fitting reed valve induction systems to these two-stroke engines. And once again, you can see the Mikuni carburetor with that cold start choke lever. But these Hyro motors were excellent little engines, and that is possibly the main reason why many different manufacturers use these engines in their particular machines. Now, as you would expect on an Italian manufactured machine, a lot of locally manufactured parts fitted to this bike, and these 35mm Marzocchi forks were very good suspension systems back in their day. Now, there was not a lot of scope for adjustments on these suspension systems, mind you, but with a little fiddling around and changing different springs and oil weights, you could certainly get these suspension systems to work quite well. But of course, this was the 1980s, and as suspension systems go, these were very decent suspension units for their time. Now, it's quite hard to imagine that these wheels are now 40 years old, and these alloy Acront rims look like they have just come straight out of the wrapper, and naturally they're complemented by still having their original Pirelli Garagros tyres fitted, which is really amazing in itself. Now, once again, as you would expect, more Italian manufactured parts in the rear suspension department here, with these Corticosa piggyback rear shocks. But to be truthfully blunt, these Corticosas were not the best suspension units, although they did look the part on this bike in 1980. But for their time they were good enough for your average club rider, but if you were really serious about your motocross, there were much better suspension systems on the market at the time, and if you could, you would be better off upgrading to something with a bit more quality. And in fact, riders at the time used to comment about these Corticosa shocks, saying that they were only good enough to hold the back end of the bike upright while it was sitting in the showroom waiting to be sold. Now, once again, because this is a brand new bike from 1980, the Ancillotti's exhaust system is unblemished, undamaged, and even unpolluted by any carbon emissions, due to the fact that this engine has never ever been fired up. Now, the front pipe section is not unlike the old Maiko of the same year, and the configuration and shape is also very similar. Now, the front exhaust pipe of course leads into this SEM alloy tailpipe silencer, which if you remember is almost identical to the one that was fitted to the little TGM 125 that we profiled in the previous video. Now, once again, a plastic fuel tank on these 1980 Ancillottis. There were very few manufacturers still using alloy or steel tanks at the start of the 1980s, and this particular storage tank could hold about 1.5 gallons of pre-mixed fuel, which was more than enough to complete a lengthy moto race. Now, once again, quite a decent sized seat fitted to this bike, with a good amount of padding when you got your chance to lay your backside on top of it. The seat was also of a good length as well, which naturally helped the rider to move his weight up and down the bike to help balance the front and rear end of the machine. Now, as motocross rear swing arms go, this polished alloy swing arm fitted to our Ancillotti has to be one of the nicest yet. Although it may look like somebody has been out with the polishing buff on this swing arm prior to getting these pictures done, but this is exactly how these swing arms left the factory all those years ago. But then again, you can't beat the Italians for adding a bit of glamour and style to their bikes. But despite that, nevertheless, it still looks the dog's bollocks, and certainly looks like it's strong enough to cope with any rough and ready motocross track. Although mind you, it may look somewhat different if this bike ever got the chance to compete in a full length motocross event. Of course, Ancillotti called this their rear fork with controlled strength, but between you and me, I think that was really just a posh phrase for a very shiny rear motocross swing arm. Now, all the original bars, grips and levers, of course, with this being a new and unused machine. Also fitted are these very nice lever covers to stop dirt and any moisture entering the end of the control cables. But these controls look like they've never aged a single day in 40 years, and they still look immaculate. Now, the throttle gasser looks like it could possibly be another Tomaselli unit, as these were supplied to many of these Italian crossers back in the day. Now, the bike's plastics are still as they were when they left the factory in 1980. No fading of any kind on these plastics. The panels, mudguards, etc. are all in absolutely first class condition. Now, of course, back in 1980, these 250 Ancillottis at the time of their release were designated the CRH/3 model. Now, naturally, Ancillotti fitted their own front and rear brake hubs on this bike, and as this was still 1980, a set of good old-fashioned drum brakes were used to try and slow this little bike down. Disc brakes were not on the menu for this bike at this time, although the old drum brake affairs did their job well enough to help you to slow down. And once again, you can see how great condition these plastics are in. This little side panel, of course, was on the outside of the plastic airbox. But up until the arrival of the big Japanese motocross machines into the market in the early 1980s, Ancillotti were a market force in the manufacture of motocross machines in Europe. Although, as with many of the other small motorcycle manufacturers, they just couldn't compete with the volume of Japanese machines that came on to the market at the time. And in 1985, Ancillotti ceased motorcycle production. Now, these Ancillotti machines may not be a household name or even well known in certain parts of the globe, although in Europe in the 1980s, many of these smaller motorcycle manufacturers were supplying riders with their race machines on an almost yearly basis. But with the influx of the big four Japanese manufacturers of Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha and Kawasaki, this really spelled the end for smaller concerns such as Ancillotti, and many motocross bikes similar to these remained unsold in showrooms all over Europe. Now, okay, we still have one more bike from Terry's collection still to feature here on my channel, and next up, it's the fifth and final machine in this current series of Terry's bikes, so look out for this stunning 1981 Motovilla 250 MX, coming soon, right here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. This video was brought to you in association with World Sport. the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more information.